Mission-driven development is something that I've been working on for the last decade, and it's a process. It's one that has been very fluid, and we continue to adjust it. And as we learn from the things we did right and learn from the things that we did wrong, we continue to update this this process of how do we look at redevelopment of church property in a way that is meant to not just continue our mission and ministry, but actually to expand it. All right. And so we've had this lecture a couple of times. Most recently, it was a full day event at the Interchurch Center at our conference that we have every year, which we have another one in November. The reason we wanted to change this format, because at that conference we have close to 300 people of various levels of understanding about development projects. And so the feedback we were getting from some was that, they having a little bit more in-depth information, a little bit get more granular with it and really understand kind of the digging into what mission-driven development is. And so what you'll see over the next couple of days, some of the speakers like Jeff has presented before, Tim, and what you'll see is that we're not going to just talk about, okay, well, what is a zoning analysis and how do we, what does it mean and how can you determine what you can build? We're actually going to we'll do a little bit of that for the benefit of background, but then you'll hear later today, how do we go through a whole rezoning, application? What is the whole Euler process like? What happens if you want to build, but because of the way your lot is set up, you can't get to the height that you want, or you need a waiver for setback or whatnot. So we're going to go through the BSA process. How do you go through a BSA waiver process? Many of you, especially in the Episcopal Diocese, have landmark buildings, or you sit in landmark. That's always the face, yeah. But you have those restrictions, but there are also opportunities that come along with that, with a 74-711 application to try to maximize or use the landmark to build nearby to it if you have an adjoining site that may not be or whatnot. So we're going to actually get into those processes, because I think, and the reason we selected, this group was limited to 20 people. Was because we wanted a couple of things. We wanted it to be the folks who are going to be doing this often or have been doing it often already. But we also wanted it to be a situation where you can actually ask questions and we can have a conversation and talk about it. And that's very difficult with 300 people in the room. But here we can accomplish that. So I will say I'm going to not spend a whole lot of time on some of these slides because they've been presented before, but I want to create kind of a quick background, and then we'll get into the substance of some of the more specific things. So mission-driven development is about redeveloping church property to build new and reimagined spaces that foster and sustain the mission and ministry of congregations while creating income streams to support those endeavors, right? So I always say that in order for any of these projects, a project to be successful, we need to have not only a income stream that comes from the project to help support that ministry, right? We need to actually have a mission plan with leadership that's going to be able to take that to fruition. But a lot of it also has to do, and this is something that I push for more so, is that we need to have the right spaces, because many of our spaces are no longer suited for the needs for which they were built 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So if we don't have all of those pieces in one of these projects, I'm worried that we're setting ourselves up for failure. And so that's the key to the mission-driven development. Having a mission plan for that particular site that actually addresses the needs of that community, right? That means we have to be thoughtful about this, which is if we're going to do a redevelopment project in a certain community, we need to understand what the actual demographics are, what the changes are happening in that community, what the needs are in that community. So things like the canvassing of that area needs to happen. Meeting with local officials, meeting with other nonprofits, and that's something that I'll touch on a little bit later. Why that's so important, because those partners can be not only partners in mission, but they could also be potential tenants for your spaces, because a lot of times they're looking for space, right? So understanding what those needs are in advance of going and starting to design a new building is important, so that we're actually building a building that's going to be occupied and can produce income. Then that's part of the space plan, which is what I just discussed. The income stream can come in various ways, right? And so that can come from an endowment that's created by a sale, that can come from a ground lease payment, that can come from joint venture income. So there's a lot of ways to get there. And the key is to make sure that that is a long-term income stream that goes into perpetuity, all right, or at least into the near perpetuity. Designing and branding. And so one of the sessions which we had at our conference was grow development, and they're really not architects, they're space planners, but they go beyond that. It's about understanding how do we design a space from a look perspective, from where do we place things? It is intentional. When you walk into a Starbucks or you walk into a Chase, it is intentional the way they set up their stores. It has been studied. They've studied the way folks like to walk in and where they like to gravitate to. It sounds corny for a church to have to do that, but it clearly has not been working for us for many, many years. And so maybe it's time that we use these resources that we have, which is to study. Maybe when I walk into a building and I see certain colors, I feel more relaxed when I come in. I feel more, I enjoy being there. And so why not use these resources and study that? So GROW is going to spend a considerable amount of time thinking about what that process is like. So as we are redeveloping properties, we're not just building the same thing that we built already before, right? And we're doing it thoughtfully. And what the end result goal for someone like a GROW is, when you work with a denomination, is to say, we're going to have a brand, a look to our denomination that speaks to the values which we have, which can be very different from one denomination to the next in terms of what we want to show as our face to the world. And so that's going to be something that we need to think about too, because as we're building, especially many in this room who are doing multiple projects, wouldn't it be nice if we went if we were in the Bronx or Queens or in Brooklyn, and we could recognize our church from either the inside or outside for the way it was designed and what that means for us, right? And obviously the leadership question is something that we'd like to spend some time at the end kind of talking about at the last seminar, for those, if you still survive it. I know it's a big time commitment, but I hope you'll find it worthwhile, is the idea of doing redevelopment projects within congregations that do not have proper leadership. There's no sense in doing them at all. And so it's a tough question for many of the bishops in the room, but how do we address the need to have the right leadership in that redevelopment, so that we make it a successful redevelopment? Obviously, we know that income from these projects can be used to assist in operating expenses, but a lot of it is, how can we reduce the time that we're spending? Because most of the time I walk into a board meeting or a council meeting or whatever you call it in your particular denomination, 90% of the time is spent talking about how we're going to fix the boiler and what bake sale we're going to have to get there. And so how do we minimize that? And what I'd like to challenge a little bit from the denominational perspective is, are we properly providing the resources to our individual congregations who can no longer afford to do it themselves? And is that something that we should be doing more of? Which is, and that doesn't have to be necessarily a financial contribution directly, but what I mean is, you no different than, for example, a franchise operation. You have 200 folks who are, each congregation is trying to develop their own website with their own website company. That's crazy. It's not cost effective. It doesn't make any sense, right? You have congregations out there that each of them, I could walk into a dozen congregations, each of them has their books and records done in a different way, if they have them at all, right? So are we providing even just training right? Having regular training for congregations, but most certainly that the congregations that are going through redevelopment, those congregations need to be trained for success. Because if you take the same bookkeeping, you take the same mentality that we had in an old church building and just put it into a new church building, you're going to be in the same exact spot, but it'll have central air conditioning and an elevator, right? And so when we think about it from a denominational perspective, right, is what resources should we be providing to our congregations in redevelopment, right? And the idea is for those of us who are not, we're not Catholic and can force these things on your congregations, the idea is that how can we then make these redevelopments a model so that others will want to join and redevelop as well, right? And I don't need to say that every redevelopment involves the building of a residential tower or a commercial space. Redevelopment can be a congregation that's just going to, demolish their building or even renovate their existing church building, right? And they have funds to renovate it, but we want to make sure they're doing it in the proper way. So these are the steps, and throughout the next 3 sessions, we're going to be talking through it. Today, we'll be talking about developing a mission plan, the fundamentals of effective space planning, and then we're going to get into understanding project feasibility, which is going to be the zoning section of this, and the various ways that we can take our properties and increase value to them. Then, as we go into the next a couple of sessions, we're going to spend some time talking about what are the different types of transactions that you can do, right? There's affordable housing transactions, there's joint ventures, there's a sales with a church back, there's ground leases, and we're going to actually talk through what the pros and cons are for each of them and share what are some of the tax consequences. Some of these have tax consequences that folks don't even know about until after they're done. My favorite is people come in all the time, they want to do a joint venture with a for-profit developer. And I said, well, that you realize all your income from there is going to be subject to UBIT. Oh, I didn't know that we don't pay tax. Well, you will. And so sometimes you're better off doing a ground lease, right, and take less risk and not be subject to tax. You might end up in the same spot. So we're going to actually work through that. And then once we're done there, we're going to take you through these agreements. I know everyone's going to be a lawyer by the time we're done here. So we're going to actually take you through the agreements and pinpoint the big ticket items that show up in a typical affordable housing joint venture agreement that you need to be aware of. Like, what are the major decisions? Because you're not the developer, there's a developer partner there. What are the major decisions that you need to, as the church, have to make sure that you have those rights to protect you in this joint venture relationship? Because you're not going to be the managing member of a joint venture. So what does that look like? What are the things in a ground lease that come up? So we're going to actually talk through those various documents so that you have a sense of what are the important big ticket items you need to work through. And then the fun part, Tim is going to kind of guide us through, the schematic and schematic design phase through construction drawing phase to say, okay, how do we get from point A to actually having a complete building? And what are the pitfalls that occur and things we need to know about with respect to budget that maybe we didn't expect but came up. And then at the last session, we're going to have Grow Development is going to be, Rod Grozer is going to be speaking about this, spending a lot of time talking about these design concepts. And in addition to design, how can that you can create a model, sort of I don't know the word that he uses for it, but a model that you can then, as a denomination, provide to your individual congregations who are either going through redevelopment or simply redesigning a part of their building, or they're changing carpet, so that as they're doing it, they're coming with some direction into the process, as opposed to every single one of them hiring some different designer and spending the money to hire that. If we create one set of guidelines, or at least recommendations that were thought through with the various stakeholders of your denomination, including those congregations, then that's something that we can provide that's a useful tool to say, this has been thought out, right? If you're going to be renovating or choosing different carpet for your sanctuary space, maybe this is something you can think about that's important, that's been studied. And then the always the area of most litigation, which is your construction process. Okay. So I'm not going to, I put this for the sake of having it in your handouts, but I'm not going to get into these sections because we're going to be covering, these are what I just went through: developing the business plan, designing the church, construction oversight. I do want to just go through a few examples of projects that are currently in process, and we'll start with the Atlantic District, and talk through, you know, what are kind of the unique, what's unique about this project that, you know, that we can be thinking about that sometimes isn't, you know, something that we would normally go to in a affordable housing senior project, right? And so this is Emmanuel Evangelical Lutheran Church in Queens and in Corona. And so this is that we have very low density here. So we're looking at this site and saying, well, what is it that we could actually build on this very small site that we can only get up to 3 or 4 stories? How are we going to create this income stream added on to building our church space and then having the right leadership, right? Well, we have the leadership. We have Pastor Holman, right, who's been successful at his congregation in Christ Woodside. But we had enough from the project to maybe build our church, but we wanted to create an income stream on top of it. But we couldn't get really traction with a residential development because there simply was not enough square footage. So here, you know, I picked up the phone and called the school construction authority and my contact there and said, hey, would you like to joint venture on this project? We are going to self-construct a building. We're going to build a core and shell for you, right? And then we'll rent it to you for a 25-year lease. And that 25-year lease is covering the mortgage and some on the construction costs for our building. And then at the end of 25 years, we now have a debt-free property and a potential to continue renting to another school or to use it for other purposes, with a new church facility being built on the ground floor. And so that's ways to, and this just gives you kind of a sense. I think there's been some recent iterations, and Tim is working on this project with us. It's probably good for you to meet Tim. Have you met Tim?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. That's Tim. The next session, right? But what I just want to point out is that this is an area that is a low density area that most folks would say, well, we should just sell this property because there's not going to be some great ability to do a development project here. That with a little bit more creative thinking and realizing that Corona is in desperate need of seats for their UPK program, we're able to partner up with a solid tenant. And not only, have our new church facility in the building, but also providing ministry for young children upstairs. So some of the thoughts I think that are coming out, Josh, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're planning on doing once it's open. I know there was an after-school programming that you want to.
Really wrap around ministries. Kids coming, especially immigrant needs in that community, so a lot of first generation.
Great. So, yeah, we're well on our way with this. The Evangelical Lutheran Church of the Epiphany, which is part of the Metropolitan New York Synod, I bring it up only as an example of a congregation that was going to do the wrong project, and then we were able to get involved with the help of the Synod to make this what's going to be a really successful project. They happen to have it's kind of a unique site in that there's a school, a church building, and then 2 townhouses. And they were going to sell the church building and the 2 townhouses, take that money and build on a small site that they had across the street. The issue was that they were going to spend most of the money from the sale on the site across the street, and it doesn't solve the big problem, which is this is one of the few Lutheran schools that is actually doing fairly well in this neighborhood. And we wanted to make sure that if we're going to make this congregation survive, the only way to get there is to make sure that the school survives. Because I showed up there for services on a Sunday and asked the congregation how many people went to the school or their kids go to the school, and it was like 90% had affiliation to the school. And so the big issue we needed to deal with is actually how do we create the endowment for the school? And so instead of having them sell, we did a ground lease on that same site, transferred some of the development rights, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, from the school onto that site. So we made it more valuable. We then took a loan out from the Mission Investment Fund, which is the ELCA's lending arm, right? I think it's fair enough to call it that. We took out a loan to construct our building secured by that lease agreement. And the Synod made a very generous grant to that congregation to help get them through the next couple of years while this process is ongoing. And so, but at the end of it will have net positive income throughout all that term, and there's escalations every year. And then at the end of 25 years, I think it's like 680,000 of income that's going to come to that congregation on an annual basis with escalations, right? So this is a congregation that, you know, will survive with proper leadership in a brand new facility. And this is already in construction. We've, I think foundation work, excavation is done. Foundation work is now ongoing. And this is what ultimately the building is going to look like with a basketball court, playground area on the roof. And that's the residential building. This is being done with Guido, which I know you've worked with a couple of projects on as well. Zion Lutheran, and this is a project that should be closing next month. This is a congregation that closed, right? So we said, well, what are we going to do with this site in a congregation that has closed? And we're doing a affordable senior housing project with a nonprofit developer. The unique part of this, again, was that one of the things, we were going to sell the property outright and then was going to be cash coming to us at the closing. But we had encouraged the Synod to think about the potential of also renting to a UPK. So instead of taking the entire acquisition cost, right, the acquisition price is cash, we left, you know, some of it on the table and had them build out a facility that's going to be on the first and second floor that is going to be also rented to the School Construction Authority over a long-term lease. So the beauty of this is that it's not just that we're going to be getting a pretty significant income stream coming from this project from the rental, in addition to the acquisition cost. 25 years from now, when that lease is over, we have a place on this corner in this area of Brooklyn. And so it allows us to think more long-term about maybe today we had no use for it because the congregation has closed, but we can think about that in 25 years from now, we can do some other type of ministry out of this location. Because what is the likelihood that if we don't keep this spot, that you're going to buy it again in 25 years? It's not happening, right? So the idea is to keep, you know, as much foothold as we can in neighborhoods, because neighborhoods change and the needs change. And whether it means one day putting in a new church start in this place, or it means adding some other type of ministry in that location, we continue to have that ability to do so. As you can see, I'm not a big advocate for the outright sale of church property without keeping little spots along the way. This is the Bronx Seventh-day Adventist Church. They have like basically a full city block. And so when we looked at this, I think we were in an R5, except we have that senior housing that was done with some variances. But across the street, it was, I think, an R7. And so we had, you know, approached city planning about rezoning this site from an R5 to an R7, which they were very supportive of, as is the council member. But what that created is basically took our value, which I think was around $4.5 or $5 million pre-rezone, to I think $17 or $18 million after. We are having the developer at their cost to go through the rezone process, but we get our valuation is based on post-rezone square footage, right? So we get the benefit of the post-rezone square footage, obviously at a slight discount. You can't have your cake and eat it too, but it's better than us having to try to do this deal and then, you know, take it at what the value is today. So we were able to increase that. And so this is what's being designed there. That the little blue building on the right-hand corner is actually 42,000 square feet. All right, so that's a new church that's going to be built there on that corner. That I think the seating in the sanctuary is for 800 people. Yeah, it's a big church. bring up, this is my last one, and then I'm going to pass this along to John. This was this is an affordable housing project done with the mix and match program in Jamaica, Queens. And what's fascinating is the various components that's part of this project. It not only has a low-income housing portion to the building, it has a mixed-income housing portion to the building. It has a new commercial unit that's being built, a new community center that's being built, and that's going to be operated by the church. And then we're just working on a process right now, which with a very large healthcare provider to do affordable healthcare, because that was such a need in this community that we're going to be renting about 10,000 square feet to. So it has like everything in here. And the reason it was done that way was because this congregation took years to actually canvass this community and meet to find out what the needs are. It was intentional, the putting in of affordable health care, urgent care to this community. And so they teamed up with a nonprofit in order to provide that. So that wasn't just like, it happened, right? They went outside, what is it that you need? And so this will ultimately be and a very profitable project. And I'll just say this project, like almost every single one of my affordable housing projects, we always build in the right at the end of year 15 of the regulatory period to take the property back for $1 with the debt on it, okay? Again, I think that churches should continue to own land in perpetuity. So to the extent that we continue to build these options into these agreements, we can joint venture with a development partner, that's not a problem, but they can take developer free, we can negotiate how we want, but at the end of some period of time, the church needs to have the ability to take that property back and then have someone else determine at 60 years from now when the building is out of the regulatory period, right, what they're going to do with that site. So this is just a rendering of,
What's that called again?
it's a tree of life. Yeah. It was a really, it was a very unique project because it was, the mix and match programs, you might hear this as you go on the affordable housing world, is actually a more high income type. So it's not meant to be just low income housing. It's supposed to span different types of affordability all in one place. So it actually leads to much higher returns in the pro forma. The income that comes out of this is pretty significant, unlike most low income housing projects. The unique part of it is that requires more equity contribution into the project, because HPD isn't going to fund the same amount if you're going to get that kind of money back as they will if you're going to get this kind of money back. So the issues that came out of this was with the Attorney General's office versus HPD, because the AG's office was saying, well, why is there so much equity in the acquisition going into this project? And they weren't looking at the long-term income stream that was coming from there, but just because it hadn't been done. So one day on a call, I said to HPD, I said, has this ever been done with a church? And they said no. And that was why. So the AG's office worked really hard to quantify the future payments and what the risk was involved. But this is a fascinating project, and it's always worth a conversation with Reverend O'Connor.
Right, I've heard him speak, especially at the closing, trying to find the documents that were needed for the closing, which they had trouble finding.
It was,
Did you find it?
we were the attorneys for the project, yeah. But this was a 10-year project to get to, we're in construction now. Okay, so if there are any questions on this so far, I just wanted to kind of give you an overview about what we're going to be talking about. We'll have John come up and talk a little bit about mission planning. Thank you. Just to stay in front of it, just so that the folks just hit the little clicker and that goes forward.
Renato's full presentation, by the way, as well as mine, is from the Synod Assembly of the Metropolitan New York Synod, and mine from a conference last year, are actually on the homepage of our website, councilofchurchadvisors.com. So I know you'll want to watch this again for all the nuggets that you certainly missed, or if you want to point someone to take a look at it. One other personal note. Today is September 10th, and some of you know I worked as the director of Lutheran Disaster Response at Ground Zero for 5 years. This is a very difficult week for a lot of people, maybe for you, and certainly for those who responded to those who responded. If you know anyone like that, be extra sensitive with them because they are going to be very highly emotional this week. Many people thought the 10th anniversary, okay, we're done now. No, for many, it will never be done. So I'll appreciate your thoughts and prayers on that. So you're going to hear a lot about how to do stuff. And by the time we're done, unless you are an attorney or an architect, I hope you will learn you are not an attorney and you are not an architect and walk away with phone numbers. You're going to hear a lot about how. My few minutes is about so what and why. Because if you can't answer that question, it's not worth knowing the how or knowing who knows the how. Let me tell you about the first mission, not the first one, but I was sent out by the bishop to go help a congregation, I won't say where, to work on their mission plan. They were really struggling. I walked into this, a true story. All the stories I will tell you are really not fake stories. I walked in, and there were 4 people sitting in the front of the sanctuary with tables in front of them. And I walked in, representing the bishop and the synod, and I thought I was there to work with them on their mission plan and let's see what we're going to do. Now, on the table, and you may remember these, were booklets. They were certificates of deposit. And they were deciding how to divide them up among themselves. This is true. They weren't working on a mission plan. This was hospice care. And they were actually, and I said, well, you really can't do that. Well, it's our money. We've been giving it to the church all these years, so we're just going to take it back. That was not a mission plan. My first phone call, by the way, was to Howard Capel, one of the founding partners of this firm. Mission planning is all about attitude and inclination. If there's not an attitude to want to plan, if there's not an inclination to want to plan, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Anybody know who that is? Wow.
I know what he did.
That is Dr. Seuss. Right. I knew him as Dr. Seuss. But Dr. Seuss said something that I think is a perfect segue in a congregation who wants to spend not 90% of the time talking about the roof, but 90% of the time talking about the good old days, which probably weren't all that good. I don't even think the coffee was better then than it is now. But probably, and people were still, by the way, for coffee hour, taking the Entenmann's out of the box, putting it on a plate, putting it saran wrap over it, and bringing it to church as if they had made that blueberry crumb cake that night before. Still going on. Dr. Seuss says this: don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And that's really important to be able to say to leaders in congregations, don't cry, smile. And that begins to set the tone for mission planning. Give people the opportunity to celebrate what has been. Now, what happened for years in the church was there was a celebration of all the things we did as we closed a church. You may have experienced this in your life, that there was a special order of worship for shutting down a church. Renato and his cadre are saying, no, we don't need that order of worship anymore. It's an order of worship for mission-driven development. Dag Hammarskjöld, one of my favorite guys in the world, said, for all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. That's the thinking that's got to be in place if we want to look ahead. One of the guys that wrote a book recently, Todd Bolsinger, and if you haven't read this, I want to commit to you this book. And yes, definitely the bishops in the room, if you haven't read it, read it or listen to it in the car. That's kind of what I did, actually. Wrote a book, Canoeing the Mountains. And it's a great book. And it compares leadership in the church to Lewis and Clark. And they knew exactly what they were going to do. And they were going to take the canoes all the way to the Pacific Ocean until there was no more water to get them to the Pacific Ocean. And so they had to rethink, what are we going to do now? Their whole mission plan, when they left, all of a sudden wasn't working anymore. They didn't turn back, although many wanted them to. This was their job. From Thomas Jefferson to Captain Meriwether Lewis, the object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it as by its course of communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Conceptually stuck systems, this is from Bolsinger, conceptually stuck systems cannot become unstuck simply by trying harder. Not trying hard enough. And doing the same thing over and over again, we know what that means. You get the same result. For a fundamental reorientation to occur, that spirit of adventure which optimizes serendipity and which enables new perceptions beyond the control. It is exciting, but it's not easy. So he says there are 5 things to do. Understand uncharted territory. The world in front of you is nothing like the world behind you. If seminary professors taught nothing else in addition to Scripture, it would be that everything you experienced when you were a kid and why you want to be a pastor because your Sunday school teacher was so great, that world behind you is not the world in front of you. Don't try to recreate what your happy days were. Help to create meaningful days for others going forward. Also, no one is going to follow you off the map unless they trust you on the map. So if you're going to go into uncharted territory, you better be paying the bills. I don't know how else to say it. They've got to trust what you're doing. If you're a pastor, that means showing up on Sunday morning. There was a church that a pastor overslept. And this is a true story. He was also working in the Metropolitan New York Synod. Sorry, Bishop-elect. I probably have Atlantic District stories too, but they're not coming to mind. The pastor didn't come to church on time on Sunday. He overslept. And so the church, rather than working through this, says, okay, the place where the sexton is living, which was right next to the church, small house. The pastor had a very lovely home 6 blocks away. 6 blocks away. They moved the pastor into the house right next to the church to solve the problem. You can't make this stuff up. Relationships and resistance. You can't go alone, but you haven't succeeded until you've survived the sabotage. It is big, because the passive sabotage is worse than someone just yelling at you in a council meeting. It's the phone calls. It's the parking lot meetings. I love the parking lot meetings. I have parking lots now. For 17 years, I didn't have a parking lot. And I moved upstate, what I think it is, to Ossining, right near where Pastor Eggensteiner was. 2 months later, he decided to come back down here, and he's not pastor there anymore. So, and we're just getting ready to settle onto a church. I don't know what we're going to do. Okay. T.S. Eliot wrote this. At the end of our exploring was to arrive where we started and to know the place for the very first time. To arrive where we started. This is all part of mission planning. It's attitude and inclination. I don't put all those words up there like Renato. I just put pictures of my heroes like Dr. Seuss and Mickey Mouse. When we're thinking about the experiences in our church, we need to listen. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about now, is listening. Disney knows how to listen. Really listen. And believe me, when someone looks at your website or calls the church, you know the famous answering on, if I call a church today, our services for Christmas Eve are at 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. Don't tell me you've never gotten one of those, because I know you have.
Or the previous pastor's voice.
Yeah.
5 years ago.
The one who was moved to next door to the church. He was gone 6 months after that, by the way. Okay. We are competing with Disney. We're competing with people's experience on Amazon. Our competition is not the second church, Presbyterian church. That's our competition right there. Cell phones. Perfect. Thanks, Bill. All right. My wife and I really enjoy Disney, and we enjoy the experience. We don't have kids, which is why I think we really enjoy Disney, by the way, because we've seen the magical experiences some have. Not. Why do you bring a 6-month-old to Disney? Why? Why do people do this? At any rate, Disney keeps asking us officially, so how was this? How was your meal? How was your experience at this attraction? How did we welcome you? How many churches are brave enough to ask visitors? How many send them a questionnaire and say, so how was your experience? Every time now I buy something from Amazon, I have a questionnaire the next day. So how was that piece of furniture you bought? Oh, Wayfair, forget about it altogether. But how was that experience? They want to know. Disney really listens. You can't listen if you already know the answer. That's something else we do. We kind of have this preconceived notion because we're so smart and we ask these questions, but we already know the answer. And whatever the person answers, we're going to twist what they had to say to make sure their answer is my answer. Really listen. Don't just expect to hear what you want to hear. That's not helpful at all. Yeah, Mickey has big ears. There's no question about it. When you go through the listening process, last thing I want to say on this particular piece, it is often difficult for the leader or leaders to be asking the questions. Because people are going to, if you're the pastor, unless you're the one in the congregation who's always, if you say it's white, the pastor says it's white, there's always one person who's going to argue it's black, right? There's always one in every congregation. God has deemed it important to always have one of those in every congregation. But most people are going to want to spit back an answer that they think you want to hear because you're the leader. There's still a lot of people out there who think the pastor has the authority to decide whether or not they are going to see Jesus or see Satan wearing a Boston Red Sox shirt. Yeah, I went there. Yes. Yeah, see you next year. See you next year, Sox. Yeah, okay. Just saying, there are times that it makes sense to have someone else come in and help ask those questions. That's when you get to the what's in people's guts. I think a parallel that I can use with this, if you've ever been through a capital campaign and you really want to raise money, and not just say, okay, everybody send in a bigger check this month. But you really want to go through the process. You hire outside counsel, not an attorney, but outside assistants. And they come in and they know the questions to ask, and they go in, and it's fascinating. The answers they will get are going to be, because they're going to ask. So, sorry, pastors, but they do this. So what do you like about your pastor? And they may hear crickets. What don't you like? Then they go on for 25 minutes. What don't you like about this? What do you, all those kinds of things. You're going to get honest answers. The inside people probably are not going to get honest answers. 3 great listenings in the church. The first is to listen to God through scripture and prayer. We've got to start there. The process has to begin with the word and in our conversation, and it's two-way, with God in prayer. To listening within our congregation's community, we're going to define that a little bit, and listening to the community outside. I pray that you, Ephesians 3, I pray that you may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. And just as that love is wide and long and high and deep, so is our community. So who is your congregation's community? All too often, we say it's the 60 people in the pews most Sunday mornings. Or more. The numbers aren't necessarily going up. So I did this exercise at the last church where I served as the executive, because we wanted to look at a capital campaign. So there are people there on Sunday morning. But then the 12-step programs, we did this in a church not long ago in Mineola. I just did it with a church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. 12-step program, nursery and preschool. I mean, usually people who go to the preschools in our churches are not necessarily members of the church. But if the pastor is visible and the people are in church when it comes time to get their child baptized, I'll tell you who they're going to ask. They're going to ask the pastor at that nice preschool my child goes to. Toastmasters we had. Bloom Again Brooklyn, which is a cool ministry. Super Soccer. Oh, my word. It's a good rent in the gym. Treasure Trunk. The Canvas Shelter. Scott. When we were done at Plymouth, our community was 1,500 people who had some vested interest in Plymouth being there. Not 60. You tell us 12-step program. This happened in 2009 in New York City when churches who depended on endowments and those endowments shrunk by 50% because they were too aggressively invested or whatever. I can think of one church. They set loose 10 12-step programs. Unfortunately, they didn't tell the rest of us. I was working at a church on the east side at the time. We were getting all these calls. Do you have space for us? Do you have space for us? And we all had some limitation and couldn't necessarily accommodate everyone. But that place had a few hundred people in their community in 12-step programs that had a vested interest in what happened with that building. The scouts do. All of those who meet in our buildings, who store things in our buildings. You know who else has a vested interest? It's the deli. It's the people who forgot to buy the box of Entenmann's the night before who stop at the corner and say, I got to buy it now. And so they do. Or the people when our clocks turn back and they show up to church an hour early, they have to stop and get coffee. Every congregation is uniquely gifted by God. And congregations have to believe that. I think sometimes when congregations might be shrinking in size, or are changing direction, and people aren't coming, they think, oh, we're useless. We're no good anymore. We used to be good, but we're not. Zion Lutheran on 4th Avenue, I'm guessing, was primarily a Scandinavian church originally. Just guessing. And that's a good move to keep that property, because I've run on 4th Avenue, and if you looked at that picture, there were really nice cars parked outside. Look at all of Renato's pictures. High-end cars are always parked outside those churches. No, it's I don't think it's his car. There are different kinds of gifts, 1 Corinthians, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. Meaning of life is to find your purpose. The purpose of life is to give it away. The mission plan gets to the meaning of why is the congregation there? What is our purpose? What is our so what? We don't have to use big words. What's our so what? We're going to build a 5-story building, and Renato and the cast of characters get us through the whole thing. My question is, so what? How does that make your ministry different? Our purpose is to give ourselves away, not to be white-knuckled and to try to hold on to everything. Because the more we do that, the more trouble we're in. I think a good example of a listener is Paul. In Ephesians 17, he talks about listening. What you have to do is read that. I mean, many places in Scripture. But he listened to people in Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, Corinth, Antioch, Ephesus. Well, there's an overlay for that. Did I go the wrong way? Yeah. There you go. So, some of you know that church, or St. Peter's Church, Church of the Metropolitan New York Synod. That neighborhood has in it Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, Corinth, Antioch, and Ephesus. It is today's world of Paul. Only in this case, at least for another year and 2 months, the world of Pastor Maneater. And he went to all of those neighborhoods in his whole ministry and listened. If you go to St. Peter's, you will see how those different communities live out some things in that building, whether it's a theater, a 12-step program, music programs, art, a senior center. And that's what we've got in New York City. That's what is happening on 4th Avenue in Brooklyn. 4th Avenue in Brooklyn that's a changing area. It's dynamic. So it's listening to God in Scripture and prayer, listening to our congregations community, understanding our congregations community is not the Sunday morning group. In fact, the Sunday morning group is probably in your building less than lots of other people who are in your building. When I was an exec in school, early childhood director out on Long Island, I had 3 people stand outside the church. I had a member of the church, I had a parent, 4 people, I had a teacher, and I had a child. I did this. So I pointed to the church and school building. I said, "What is that?" The member said, "That's where I go to church." The parent said, "That's where my child goes to school." The teacher said, "That's where I work." The child says, "That's my school." The one who owns it, that 4-year-old, the others didn't say they owned it. That 4-year-old owned it. That 4-year-old's part of the community. There's no question about it. Let's not forget that. So, mission. There's identity, there's context, and there's purpose. Mission is ongoing. So you look at your your identity is who you are, right? It's who do we identify as children of God? What's our context? That's the listening component of this. What comes out of our identity and our context is purpose. And they all inform each other. But it's ongoing. Consider what the turnover is, members of a congregation in a year's time. There was a day, it was a big deal when somebody moved out of town. Not such a big deal anymore. They're coming and going all the time, right? We also have people plugging into our congregations and unplugging and plugging and unplugging. It's a different world, a different environment. There are different people to listen to all the time. Neighborhoods are changing. And so we can't say we've got our mission plan in the white binder and put it on the shelf. We've all seen those. I hope none of you have had I'm sure some of you have had those. And it's there. We've done it. We're good for 50 years. We're good. Again, I'm going to use a parallel. Capital campaigns. It used to be you would ask people to give sacrificially from their savings or their investments once a generation. Well, the fact is, waiting every 40 years to do those, we're missing great opportunities. We're leaving money on the table, frankly, because people are rotating in and out, especially in the greater New York area, especially. Not only here. There's a church I'm working with outside of Miami. They just had a turnover of a little over 20% in 1 year of members. So not only are you trying to get new members, you've got to replace the old ones. So when's the net gain going to be? But the point is, it's a shared and ongoing journey. The last generation is different than the millennials. Listen to them. The church doesn't listen very well always. And so that's our job. Any questions? That's kind of an overview. For some of you, I don't think I'm saying anything you haven't probably heard 20 times, but if you're like me, sometimes I need to hear them again. All right.
Yeah. You want to take a 2-minute break now? Is that all right? Yeah. Yeah. There's a restroom right here, and then there's another one around the much more easy right now. Yeah, now we're going to get all the house. Now it's not the house. Does anyone else want to use the restroom? So is the possibility that he's retired? He's the original. No, that was Ralph. Oh, I did indeed. Yeah, I was away for a long time. Yeah. Hi. We haven't met. Yeah, probably one of the events at the church. They do that every day. Yes. Yeah. You're the one that's on the towns. And we both had told something, yeah, but I recognize you there. I wanted to talk to you about this. We're here. So the geotech went okay, right? Yeah, the geotech went fine. Okay, it's all done. Exported up. There was some discussion about being right. There's some I remember you went through the job. To be honest with me, typing for the kids. Yeah, well, I think there was some whether that would be a good idea. Right. I think the cause yes. We do it, right? And also, there needs to be a commercial kit. Yeah. Correct.
You mean the cost? Over. You know, when somebody asks me that, I'm not going to answer it. When I cost that smart, I can give you the answer if I go back to the yeah, but I don't have the information. The problem is you have to have there is that this will give us more space well, one thing that's do not allow the two separate structures. If we were going to do that, excavate. Actually,
yeah, I'm sure.
no, it's different, but the structural engineer said the actually is not sure. So we actually have to excavate the whole footprint. So we're going to end up with this space that I think could be potentially very useful for expansion. Because it really gets going, because right now you absolutely you really are.
What you're saying is, so you're building on the foundation, basically avoided space.
Yes, yes, exactly. That will be the slab. That will be my difference. I think by code we have to put in but that space could also be used and giving you a bigger sanctuary, which is very, very tight. I mean, when you started talking yeah, we do have a limit on the number of acres of what you have because otherwise I think it was 100,000 maximum. But right now, you know, well, look at this upstairs, maybe. There is some beauty. I mean, in the current situation that we're talking about, we have to make that change. So we need to keep that up. We're going to get started. It's always kind of retro. Just want to share with you to make that reference. Somebody in Dallas, country
I was driving, so I didn't see it.
Yeah, I know. Man, Bill showed up and everything went to hell. Baby bird,
That's what I thought. So I could have.
I think David wants to bring you to it. You may want to do like a video conference.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Where are the women? There's no women here. You got to do some work.
Yeah, there's more water right outside the door.
Some work on diversity.
I know.
More women.
Oh, yeah.
So you just speak into this area and then folks can hear that are logged in remotely.
Oh, okay. Can they see me? Good.
They could just see the slides. This is your.
Okay.
We're gonna get started.
All right.
Okay.
Good, Jeff.
I'm Jeff. Jeff Weiner. I call myself an institutional space planner. I've been a city planner and a campus planner at Columbia University. And then I left Columbia 5 years ago and I began working for smaller institutions. And the smaller institutions that are really in need of space planning and development consulting are churches. And so I've done about 30 different church sites with Renato, looking at them and determining what can be built and how the properties can better meet their needs. Batteries running low. You may want to plug it in.
Okay, I'll have Josh.
Yeah. It's like 10%. Why this is the real nuts and bolts part now. You've gotten some of the more inspiring and uplifting parts. Now I'm going to give you the more practical parts. And feel free to ask questions. Feel free to interject any of your own specific concerns about space planning. The first thing that I guess it's important to look at is how does this all fit into the mission-driven development? Oh, I have to close this. Mission-driven development process. So I started thinking, okay, set the context for these people. How does my piece fit in with the rest? So the mission planning establishes a vision. And the vision is for a faith-based community of good works. That is only accomplished by the people and the programs that that the mission uses or enlists to realize that vision. So then the question is, where are you going to do this work? Where are the people and the programs going to carry out that vision? And that's where I come into the picture. And I think that really it has to be part of the mission planning process, because I think, the two things are interactive. Your space allows you to do and creates the environment for you to do a lot of the stuff that you define in stage one. Your mission has to be somehow related to what the place looks like and how it functions. So more specifically, you want the space to take advantage of the unique opportunity. You want the process to take advantage of the unique opportunity to re-examine and define the types of space. So when you're doing a big project, this is the perfect time to do it. And that's why it's one of the first things you should undertake. You also want to have something on paper that you can use when a developer becomes involved to hold them accountable and to specify what you need, because he's not going to give you what you need unless you can specify it very, very specifically. So that's what space planning is about. You also want all of the discussions with developers to be based on the same kinds of the same kinds of facilities being provided. A lot of times we get responses from RFPs, but you don't know whether you're really going to get the same thing from everybody. If you have a very, very detailed list of space program and space characteristics, you know that they're going to meet that. At least you can hold them accountable to meeting that goal. Finally, it's the one opportunity you're going to have. I mean, this happens every, redevelopment happens every generation, every 100 years. When I was at Columbia, it was like we did a new campus every 100 years. So when you're going to do it, you have to address all the inadequacies and take care of them. And this is your one opportunity. So in summary, you're going to tailor the new church to the protected programs, the activities, number of occupants, et cetera. And you're going to do it efficiently. You're not going to create underutilized spaces, and you're not going to create spaces that will be costly to operate and maintain, that'll put you in an adverse position going forward. So the first thing I do is kind of think through the perspective that planners, and I'm not talking about just space planners, but architects also. Categorize the spaces into several different types. And this is not to say that you can't use one space for a number of different purposes, but the most important spaces, the biggest spaces, are always going to be the assembly spaces. It's going to be, yeah, then we can get some. Which one? On the other side. Okay. That's it. Yep. Okay. They take up the most room. They're the most expensive to build. We're talking about the sanctuaries, the fellowship halls, and other large spaces. The meeting classroom spaces are the educational component, the office administrator, much smaller component, food service. Very important for certain congregations, not so important for other congregations. And then once you kind of inventory all of these needs, space needs, you have to add on what's called the gross up factor. And that's for all the spaces that you really can't program for activities directly. And that's the building operations spaces, the mechanical spaces, the toilet spaces, the circulation spaces. So what are the steps? I always want to begin, and this is something that, an architect would do with you if you had an architect early in the process. Usually, it doesn't make sense to hire an architect until you have an idea of what you want them to ask them to design for you. So we start with how the spaces you're currently occupying are working for you or not working for you. We look at the plans. We update the space information. We determine the square footages, the occupancy, how it's being used, the programs. We evaluate what's working, what's not working. We make lists. It's good. It's just good to start with all of the things that you want to correct. The second part is, what are you going to do in the space once you build it? So that's really a program planning exercise, and it's an open-ended program planning exercise. If you don't know all of the details in advance, but you can at least inventory what you're doing now, the types of activities, the number of participants, the times that the spaces are needed. You can make a guess on the potential for growth. You can look at the potential for off-site locations to use if you think that some of the activities can't be accommodated in the new facility. You know, there's always a lot of a big question as to, okay, so what kind of kitchen facility am I going to develop here? How often am I going to actually do a full-scale dinner and need a commercial kitchen? And some of that can be accommodated off-site if you only do it occasionally. Parking is a perfect example of an off-site use. You know, I go to the congregations and ask them how many parking spaces they need, and they say, we want 25 dedicated spaces. Those 25 dedicated spaces are going to sit there for, you know, 6 days a week, and eating up resources, either, you know, money that could be put to better purpose, land that could be put to better purposes, or anyway, it's that's the kind of thing that can be done very easily offsite. The other listing that we always go through is, what are the programs to be operated by the others who you want to partner with? So if you're going to do daycare, you have to bring them into the conversation, the operator. If you're going to do 12 steps, you have to know what kind of populations are going to be involved, and what days and what times and what hours. If you're going to do health services, same thing. So I begin with kind of a program summary, and that begins to give me an idea of the quantity of space and the types of space, but there's also the feel and look of the space. And there really, very early on, have to be some basic decisions about, you know, what kind of worship space we're going to want to project the image that the worship space will project. Is it traditional kind of sanctuary with fixed pews? Is it going to be something that is a flexible space that can be used for other purposes? The examples I give you in the photographs are things that, you know, are in one case very, very flexible with a flat floor, and in other cases less flexible with theater-style seating and movable, and then the question of whether you have pews and rearrange. Yeah. So the other thing to think about is, okay, how can we have this list of programs. How can some of the spaces be used for more than one program at different times of the week? How many and different times of the day? Having flexible spaces, it's the only way you're going to be able to run at full capacity. The other thing you have to think about is, how can these spaces accommodate completely new uses and programs over time? I don't want to lock you in. When I define a space program, I don't want to lock you into keeping exactly the way we're using it now forever and ever. So the example I give here is a space that actually is used for arts performances, recreation activities, and worship. The one on the right is is a gym, but it's also a fellowship hall. So, the idea of flex space is key. So this is the part of the whole process, and this is something that I want to talk a little to you about in detail and answer any questions. So we know what kind of programs we're going to have. We're going to look at the largest number of the target numbers of people who are going to be attending the programs. We're going to look at how much space those people will occupy, depending on what kind of layout they're going to be using. So this is where the whole idea of density comes in, and we have benchmark densities depending on what kind of floor plan you're going to have and how you want the program to be operated. These are just examples. These are all roughly the same size space, but very, very different numbers of occupants and very, very different densities. The categories that we identified before, the assembly spaces, the classrooms, the programs, the offices, food, can be broken down into subcategories of room types. And then we can put in how many people you think would occupy that kind of room based on different densities. And this is an example of where I tell people, okay, if you're going to have people in workstations, you can get a very small number of people. If you're going to have them standing around, obviously you have much higher capacity. Seated in rows. This is an example where you have table setup. These are classroom setups, and the classroom setups vary depending on whether it's for grade schoolers, for pre-kindergartners. So what they have here is some sense of, okay, if we give that particular room type X square feet, this is going to be its capacity. And that is a tool that we use to refine and determine, what we're going to ask for in the final space program. And the furniture arrangements can vary over time, but the space, the walls are not going to vary. Movable partitions are always a good idea if you can deal with the sound transmission problems. But for the most part, this is the way that you're going to determine how much space you're going to need, and you're going to add up all the numbers, put in a gross up factor for the non-program space, and come up with okay, I want the developer to provide about 11,000. This is a very, very small church, 12,000 square feet, and I know that this is what's going to be accommodated in that space based on the different layouts. So it's a nuts and bolts way of showing people, what you can do with certain quantities of space broken up and configured in different ways.
Just so when we put out an RFP to developers for a development project with a new church, we will almost always, at the very least, include this program study so that we're getting proposals based on the same idea. Because if you just say, we need you to build us a church, various developers think differently. And then sometimes, but not all, depending on the financial ability of that church, will have gone a little bit further with some kind of schematic or layout. But generally, this at least gets us started with the RFP so everybody knows, okay, we're dealing with what type of spaces. It also lets them see what the large spaces are, the big span spaces, and it already assumes some of the costs that come with that.
Yeah, so this is an example of what would be in an appendix to an RFP. It would be a quantitative space table, and it would be a narrative description of what that space should look and feel like, what functional qualities it has to have. Does it need high ceilings? Does it need natural light? Some spaces, a lot of, there's always the question, okay, what can be put below grade? Because that's the less expensive space. If you're going to build a cellar and you're going to use it for storage, you're wasting a space asset that you could use for some other purposes that don't need natural light. That's exactly the process that we go through. Now, who should be involved in that process is a separate question. And how you involve the people you need is important. I always recommend establishing some kind of working group. It's not entirely a top-down project, top-down process. It's got to be collaborative. It's got to include, obviously, the leaders of the churches, the congregations, but also the administrators and the participants who understand the programs. We did extensive space programming at one site in Soundview, and there was a large committee, and the people in the food program said, "You don't understand what we need, and you got to come down and look at it, and we got to show you how we operate." And I did, and we changed the numbers. So it's important to reach out to all the representatives of the major stakeholder groups, all the user groups, and achieve buy-in first, up front. There's always going to be competing interests, but if there is a question as to, okay, so are the Sunday school people asking for too much space? Go through a process, set up an informal committee, and look at that particular space need, and then come up with a consensus decision. Let me talk a minute about spaces that are kind of unique because of the requirements and constraints. Places of assembly in New York City, any room holding over 75 people or more, are considered places of assembly. They have to have separate means of egress. They have strict fire and safety and sprinkler codes. They're more expensive to build because of that, and they generally have to have high ceilings. So one of the earliest things we do is kind of project the largest numbers that we're ever going to gather on site and figure out, does that make sense? Or alternatively, and this is, I'm not trying to be to downsize unnecessarily, but on the rare occasions when you do have bigger events, you want to do it outside. Performing arts spaces. Certain congregations are very, very committed to musical and dramatic performing arts. High ceilings, raised stage areas, special lighting grids, acoustical treatments, flexible seating for different layouts. These are all things that you're going to have to work into your space specifications if you want to do that kind of programming. So you think about it up front. If that's not a priority, don't go there, because those are all going to kind of affect the flexibility of the space, and they're going to add some money. Childcare spaces in New York City, we have health department licensing requirements. They're very strict facility operating requirements. Anything operating more than 5 hours per week, any childcare operation operating more than 5 hours per week with 3 or more children under 6 years of age is all under this restriction. And you're going to go through a whole bunch of inspections, and there's a lot of limitations associated with the kinds of spaces that you have to provide for them. Gymnasiums are space hogs. and they're expensive to build. They're only worthwhile, in my view, if you really have a very, very robust program set up for recreational activity, or if you have a group of outside groups that are actually going to commit to lease the space and pay you for its use. And so they're often underutilized. If sports and recreation are important missions, by all means, look into it. If they're not, then try to go with a more flexible layout that doesn't have a regulation-sized basketball court. The other thing is that gymnasiums are one of the uses that can be put in below-grade spaces without natural light. So if you're going to do a deep basement, if there's not any rock to blast, that's where to do it.
Just one comment on the child care spaces on a couple of the deals we've been working on recently, where there isn't a need right away for a UPK type program, or the city doesn't need one, but we're already putting in a few classrooms for Sunday school and a conference room and a meeting room. We've put in the City of New York's requirements for UPK programs when we design those rooms, so that in the future, if we're not using it during the week, we can actually turn around and say, well, we have already met your requirements. They have very strict light requirements, what floor they can be on. So it's just something to think about, is like this, what could be a different use that's going to be in the future if we change kind of what our needs are, just to kind of think about that a little bit.
Okay. The initial entry point for the sanctuary and for the complex as a whole is a critical piece of space that should be thought about very, very early on. Is it a gathering place? Is it a lounge? Or is it just a place to pass through? This is traditional narthex. It's basically just a vestibule. Other people have begun to think of them as, well, this is kind of like a Starbucks. This is the place where people hang out before the service and after the service. Does it need a coat check? Can we do without? It's obviously, you don't want to create a lot of space that's only going to be used as a pass-through. So think through how you can program it in addition, even overflow seating for the sanctuary, with video screens if there's no direct sight lines into the sanctuary itself. So I put that in the list of special purpose, special requirement spaces. Finally, I just want to point out that everything that you do is gonna need to have media capability. You're going to need a board. You're going to need that you can use for lighting equipment, audio equipment. Probably you're going to want to have video recording and playback equipment. All of this stuff has to be accommodated. Working in early on. Some congregations are now thinking that, a lot of stuff is done virtually, and they need to produce high quality videos in a studio setting. And we're getting requests for, sound studios and video studios, or at least rooms that can be adapted for that use. Finally, kitchens. I mentioned all the things that, some of the things. They're expensive to build. They require an external flue. They have fire suppression requirements. The utilities are expensive. So it's very important to think about the number of catering and the large events where you're going to want to actually have in-house food preparation versus outside catering. And whether it's kind of a do-it-yourself kitchen or whether it's professional/commercial kitchen. Again, it's it's one of those critical pieces that there's a lot of controversy about because it's yeah.
We actually did a tour of kitchens in the church kitchens in the city. A church wanted to work on a kitchen, and which they're not there anymore because it's not an idea. But an increasing number of churches are putting in warming units rather than all these cooking units.
That's right.
Because the outside cooks just need a place to warm it. And an increasing number of churches in Manhattan just rent the dishes for their 4 events a year and don't need all this storage for all the old dishes that they have. So it's just something we thought we were around all these kitchens.
Yeah, well, I don't even mention it here, but obviously a dishwashing section is a whole other investment. And very few churches are now, I think, deciding that they need full plate service with dishwashers and so forth and so on. They'll use disposables or they'll use rental. So what have I learned? Okay. Doing different space programming assignments. People, often say, well, why don't we just get the architect to design it? Some architects are great at figuring out what the congregation really needs to be designed. Some are not so great. By having this step done before you even approach an architect, I think you're protecting yourself. Architects tend to want to build, monuments or really nice spaces, and they're not always good at thinking about, all of the other considerations. I recommend a separate space programming step before the designs. You can still refine the design later on and come up with creative alternatives for meeting that space requirement. Start with a good understanding of how much money will be available. $300 to $400 a square foot is, typical, and it could be much more. Keep in mind, you have to, every time you do a space plan, you have to do kind of a projection of the maintenance costs associated with that space plan. So, doing a mission evolves into planning a space, evolves into planning an operating budget. And it should be thought about upfront. And finally, the one that I keep harping on is not all space requirements can or necessarily should be met in the building. If you want to, ideally, yes, it would be great to have everything under one roof. But if you're only going to use it, 5 times a year, don't build it for yourself. Find it someplace else. Finally, everybody I talk to says we don't have enough storage. And so including program space for furniture and equipment storage is critical. We're not talking about small closets. We're talking about where all that furniture goes when we're not using the space, the flex room, for one purpose, and we have to pull it out and store it someplace. That's what we're talking about. Be realistic, and then be prepared in the conversations with developers to negotiate and compromise, because they're going to push back. You're not going to always get what you want. And this is the push and pull of what Renato manages for you. But you can get a lot if you have a clear idea when you go into the discussions of what you need. So that's my shtick. These are examples. I decided to be ecumenical here and included one Jewish example. Here's a contemporary fixed pew sanctuary. Here's an example of a sanctuary that's completely underground, no natural light. I just wanted to give people an idea of what can be done. There's a sanctuary that's really built at very low cost and can be used for any number of purposes, because you can move these pews, they're not really pews, they're benches. They can be moved. And the room can be set up for recreational or fellowship activities. And that's my spiel. Any other questions?
What about, and so often when you go through a process of come up with 50 million things that you want this building to be, and the reality becomes you build the building, have it there, and you realize that having aliens from Mars meeting on a weekly basis in your sanctuary is not going to work. But that idea of rethinking, or you built a special room just for that.
Yeah.
Rethinking that space and how you can utilize that for other things.
Right.
What part of the process do you see that as? Is that more from, do you see it as the mission planning side, or I mean, it's really the recasting of a new mission for that space?
I think there is, yes, it has to be very much tied to, is that really who we want to be 20 years from now? You know, or do we see ourselves, you know, as going in a different direction? You know, the other thing is that you can't adaptively repurpose spaces. I mean, and the trick is don't create layouts and infrastructure that can't be altered relatively easily later on. And so that's why I keep saying to people, you know, flexible spaces without a lot of expensive fixed equipment are always the way to go if you don't need it.
You get a lot of pushback for that. I agree with that completely. And idea of flexibility. I'm a huge fan of open floor plans just because of what you can do then in a multitude of different ways with the space. But your experience with people that come to you, or do you find more and more pushback of no?
No, I actually find more and more acceptance of that, to be honest with you. People understand it. And especially when you come down to the negotiations and they realize that, oh yeah, I can get a very, very high-end commercial kitchen, but I'm going to give up, you know, $5 million that the developer would otherwise give me for something else.
I think too, as fewer and fewer people are in congregations with that long institutional memory of what we've always done, I think the acceptance of flexibility comes a little bit here as well.
Yes.
Another question.
Yeah.
In your introduction, you talked about other space.
Mm-hmm.
Business owners, the likes thereof, right? To talk about what this really looks like. Talk about stages and places and the planning and the different programs that we want to have within that. I don't want it to be where we're sitting down and it becomes the United Nations. And everybody's yelling and screaming and jockeying for their ideas and their agenda.
Right.
So how do we go about planning or revisiting or reformulating what that planning committee looks like without everybody and their grandmother and the pet parent coming in to give their, it is what it is. And I'm a focused guy, you know, when it comes to that. I don't want everybody just really, I'm really trying to say, who are the really fixed individuals that really have a meaningful impact towards moving forward to have this vision come to pass? Because you can't have 35 people on a committee. It's impossible.
It is impossible. I recommend that, you know, the ideal size is 10 to 20.
We usually try to do 10 to 12 at the maximum. And it's really important that the person who really knows the folks in their congregation be the one who's involved in the selection of that group of people, so that you're not already grabbing the person who's going to create the issue.
It's a hand-picked group. I agree with you. It's not a public meeting. You are not opening it up to the public and saying, bring your ideas. No, I agree with that.
We never recommend that, but like close in, it's going to be on those.
But I also think that when I say 10 to 12, I think that there is you can actually enlist subcommittees. Right. So like the 5 people who want to do the food pantry want to get together, give you their requirements, but with the understanding that it's not all going to just be approved point blank. It's going to be, you know. But part of this is a mission question for the congregation. If the congregation sees itself as a community center, then they have to accept the fact that some of this outside, lobbying is part of the process. You know what I'm saying? If you go out and ask people what the neighborhood needs, they're going to tell you, and it's going to be hard to ignore it. And you're going to.
They don't need to be on the committee.
But they don't need to be on the committee.
Yeah.
Do you utilize surveys with the congregation? Is that one way to get input?
Different working groups have done different things. Some have had, scheduled times where they'll listen to the congregation and their input. Others have done surveys and just had it, in writing, so you don't have that kind of confrontation. And then once we have usually this put together, we'll then have another congregational meeting where everyone needs to feel. Because you're trying to, you're getting buy-in for this whole program when it's not a congregational level. What we're doing on a project on the Upper West Side is, which I think it's a deep. We created, I think, five committees in that congregation where each elder of that church is on one of the committees. And it varies in size from 6 to 8. So the total is like 40 to 50 people that are involved in one of the committees. Wow. And so we have a committee that does not for space planning. So we had the group that was involved in the space planning, which was the larger of the committee. An endowment is a sale that's coming back with a church facility. I was very concerned about what they were going to do with those funds, and so we actually had them create an endowment committee that interviewed and did a full RFP process to meet with a financial advisor to work on their investment policy statement. And so they've been doing this simultaneously while that was going on. We had one group that was responsible for the relocation and dealing with that. We had another group that is going to be more involved in the construction oversight process. And what actually that was neat is when you actually show up to vote, 50 people already have an invested interest in that project and feel like they're a part of it. So I just think it's something to keep in mind. And then you make sure that the right people end up in the right committee.
It's also nice to hear for the congregation to hear them for that. Like their own people are presenting what they thought through, what they think is best for the community instead of like Renato, myself, or an architect. It's the people in the community that are, presenting and thinking through the process, and it goes a long way with the.
I think also the design process getting fun. Typically, what are congregations that have very elaborate committees come up with long wish lists. They know that they're not going to get everything, ballet, name it. But what we do with this tool is to synthesize it into a solution. It's a three-dimensional solution. Which not only the committee is going to be happy with, but then a good way to do that is to make presentation to the whole congregation. Explain the design so that the whole congregation buys into what the subcommittees have kind of given us lead on. And that can be pretty early on in the process before the project has gone into meetings, for example. You need to, it's a good idea to have a whole way to do it.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're pointing out, you know, a step of the process which comes a little later, but is critical for buy-in. I agree, because to have a concept that people can, you know, can envision and say, oh yeah, I can see how that could work. Yeah, we can share that space with those guys. You know, I didn't think we could, but you've shown me how we could. I agree.
Right, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and then we have a full hour of the zoning to make sure everyone gets confused and disturbed before lunch.
We're religious people. A 2-minute break really doesn't fit 10 minutes.
Well, that's why it's a 10-minute break. I do it. It's 2-minute break. And I know, you know, we do have lunch that's going to be served. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get to the application.
Ryan does dealing with the city.
Hard stop at 12 or I get two?
No, it's not, but well, the lunch will be ready to have.
Okay, where's my stuff here? It should be there.
Hold on.
Right after that.
This should be larger though, right?
It's up here.
All right.
You can make that larger. For you to read it, it's just made the box big.
Very good, Jeff. I learned a lot. I learned a lot. Hard to know enough to both.
Little things.
I remember going to bed for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, SCA is based on.
Well, I mean, at least I think the SCA Oh yeah. So I understand it's a different, but we didn't have to use capital. The leases.
Yeah.
The landlord doesn't work.
How long was the lease?
There were 15 years, and we had to write the cancel.
Yeah.
They never. We had to have a clause in cancel anytime we want. What are you talking about? And it's just, we have no choice. We must be able to walk. Board of Education. Nobody can walk. That's the ranch on the green.
And
Forever.
and the landlords were not reluctant to
Oh. But the board's going to do one going to walk away from the school. Master plan changes, neighborhood changes. We do it be a 15-year lease.
But in some other
Yeah.
they always need.
They love this. Yeah.
They always need.
We never.
If that particular school isn't working out, then they'll just put them
In my experience, we never terminated lease. Absent extreme circumstances. The problem is. It's interesting, but yeah, I had to learn a lot. I had to learn from architects. I had a bunch of architects work for me. You know, and to build everything exactly the way.
Yeah.
Very specific, but they knew the specs.
Yeah. No, that.
We would design it, the landlord would build it, and then we'd pay for extra rent.
And whose architects would you use?
No, we had our own architect. We would design it. According to our design, we were the architects.
I mean, I used to say this, but I mean, people. I mean, the congregation is well low staff enough. I was an architect early on. There's no reason to not, because then you can have an RFP that actually and present that for something that actually has, you know, very detailed massing and, conceptual floor plans. And there's no reason you can't do that except that
Do that too.
really, I mean, that's no, if money were no object, sure,
You'll have your rich.
and design what you want. But that's not.
I only have places that last time. Takes a while to recover.
Instead of two, so it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, well, I'll talk quick. Okay, good morning, everybody. How are you? My name is, my name is Chris Wright. I'm zoning counsel at Capel Barnett. I'm meeting a lot of you for the first time. I'm relatively new here, but I really look forward to working with you in the years to come with zoning regulations to help you with your projects. Two things I want to say about zoning that you don't need to know anything about zoning, but if you know these two concepts, they're really important for religious institutions. I've been doing this for about 25 years, and I have never yet looked at a religious owned property that wasn't underbuilt. That means every property, every single religious institution, whether it's a 5,000 square foot, 40,000 square foot lot, has unused development rights. That means you don't have to know anything about zoning. I guarantee it. I've never run across one. And even St. Patrick's, St. Bartholomew's, it's the same thing. And so what you know is that all these hundreds and hundreds of properties that you control have unused development rights. How you use them is another issue. You can expand your community facility. You can add for-profit uses to generate funds for your mission. How you use them is the next step. But I assure you, all those hundreds of properties, and that's a huge advantage. And then the second thing is zoning regulates use. It has residential uses, it has commercial uses, it has manufacturing uses, and each zoning designation tells you what you can and cannot do. Every single zoning regulation and every single zoning district in New York City permits community facilities. A community facility is a religious institution. It's a hospital, it's a school. So going in to any zoning exercise, you know you have unused development rights, and you know any expansion of your community facilities is permitted use. How you use it otherwise, you have to be more careful. So that's something that I think if anybody takes anything away from this meeting today is those two concepts. It's a tremendous advantage. For-profit developers don't have that advantage. So what I'm going to try to do is go through zoning very quickly in some basic concepts and principles and how the zoning is governed for the city of New York. I'm going to kind of go through that kind of quickly because what I really want to get to is zoning is a living and breathing document that anticipates the future. And there's a number of zoning applications very useful to religious institutions that allow you to amend or change the zoning in a way that promotes a mission-driven development where you can expand your options, expand your uses. So you have the expanded church, you have new community facilities, you also have some low-income housing, and then you have to have some sort of for-profit entity that generates money to pay for all this. And so I really want to get the nuts and bolts of that because I think that's the most useful exercise here today. But so let me try to kind of go over basic concepts first quickly, and then we can get into the nuts and bolts. And please ask questions at any time, if you will. So this is all about how zoning, and zoning is very receptive to community facilities, religious institutions. Zoning is very supportive of all community facilities, religious facilities, hospitals, schools, for obvious reasons. This is the basic things I just talked about. It was adopted in 1961. And the reason all your properties are underdeveloped is because when zoning was adopted in 61, They created neighborhoods of 5-story buildings, 10-story buildings, 20-story buildings. Within those neighborhoods are many, many churches that are 1 or 2 stories. Those churches get the same advantages. You can build a 5-story building, a 10-story building, or a 20-story building. The question is, so that's why so many religious institutions are underdeveloped. This is a zoning map. This is where it begins. The city of New York is covered by about 80 zoning maps. They're all about the same shape and size. And there is methods to this madness. I try to pick a neighborhood that people understand. This is Thompson Square, avenues A, B, C, D, first, second, third. And you'll see in this box here between Houston and 14th, it's almost all R7, R8, all RR. R means residential only. You can't have a hotel, you can't have an office building, you can't have a Macy's. This is a residential neighborhood. This is how they're organized. The letters, the numbers, and the letters talk about both. But I just wanted to show you that this is even though it's a lot of numbers, it's a classic residential neighborhood. If you look at Park Slope, you'll see the same kind of pattern. It's almost a perfect box. That's the residential neighborhood, how zoning works. Neighborhood, the U.S. is Union Square. It's zoned with a C that allows mixed use. A C is a commercial, but it doesn't prohibit residential. Residential prohibits commercial. Commercial allows mixed use, commercial and residential, and always community facility. So you see a C district, that means you're going to find buildings of both. You're going to find a hotel, you're going to find an office building, you're going to find mixed use buildings. Commercial downstairs, residential above. So that's Union Square, and Union Square is shaded because they created a special district a long time ago to recapture Union Square because it was very run down, and now it's been recaptured. LI is the Little League. They created a special district, Deputy Gray, to preserve the character and historical qualities of the Little League. But the designations of C's, mixed use. And if you go down below Houston, this area is residential. It has only an R. Down here to the west is C4. That allows mixed use. And if you move this way towards 5th, 6th, 7th Avenue, you see a lot of commercial districts. Again, it's mixed use.
What if your property has 3 different zonings?
Well, I'm going to get to that. You can have a commercial facility, a residential, and a commercial component. And I'm going to get to a chart on that to show you how you can use that to create a mixed-use development that supports mission-driven development. And then just quickly, the East River, that's Williamsburg.
Just 1 second. Or do you mean that your one particular lot happens to have an R7 because it's going over a few different zones?
Yeah, you have to. It depends on the dimensions. Sorry.
You were blessed.
You were blessed. You were blessed.
I'm sorry.
I thought it was.
There are rules. It depends on dimensions and the size, but it's usually the one that's predominant governs. But you never can lose. You can only if the one of them is the best district and it's most of it, you can often expand it, but you'll never get decreased because of multiple districts. But you may be able to override the smaller one if the bigger one is the bigger district. Okay. But those are complicated rules. Okay. So just the East River, there is Williamsburg. That was, the waterfront of Williamsburg was rapidly rezoned a few years back. It was a manufacturing district. There was a lot of manufacturing that was remaining. A lot of waterfront manufacturing was abandoned. It was being converted illegally. So the city did a massive rezoning. This whole gray area up and down Williamsburg created mixed-use development where actually manufacturing and residential could work side by side. Generally, manufacturing districts do not allow residential for obvious reasons. But you had an active manufacturing district, and you had tremendous pressure to create residential, so the city did a massive rezoning of the whole waterfront to allow both. So this also big block here is Stuyvesant Town. One designation for a large area. Okay. Now, there's different types of community facilities, so let's go through this quickly. There's Use Group 3 and Use Group 4, and it's not crucial to understand it, but we should just get a sense of it. The big difference is Use Group 3 means you can sleep. So you have dormitories, nursing homes, and philanthropic groups with sleeping accommodations. You also have colleges, and you also have schools. And then there's a Use Group 4, which is churches, parish houses, hospitals, and philanthropic organizations without sleeping accommodations. So it's just to give a different sense of these. They break it down between 3 and 4 because you can't always do sleeping accommodations in certain areas. But for our point purposes, we're basically 4.
Sleeping accommodations includes if you have a shelter.
Yes. Yes, that's the philanthropic organizations that sleep in accommodations and some don't. That's like downstairs you have services and upstairs you have people with certain issues to be handled. Exactly. Just quickly, this is, in order to understand Antonio, you have to go through different residential use group charts. This is the residential use group chart. All the different R's are laid out here. But the important part for our purposes, if you see up above, it says residential and community facility, all are allowed in all residential neighborhoods. There's two types of residential, 1 and 2, but the use groups 3 and 4 community facility are permitted in all the residential districts. That's the important of that chart there. Commercial use groups, which are mixed use. You notice here, every commercial use group, well, except that's those exceptions. There's always exceptions to zoning. We'll worry about that down the road. All these commercial groups allow residential 1 and 2, and community facility 3 and 4. Where it gets tricky for a commercial developer is you've got to figure out which of these different commercial uses you can use. But you've got residential community facility, 5 is a hotel, 6 is almost all retail uses, and then it gets into all kinds of uses from funeral homes, cemeteries, to golf courses, to amusement parks, to waterfront uses. But that's the key here for us. Then the next thing you figure out is how big can you build. I'm sure most of you understand the concept of floor area ratio, FAR. Don't ever say FAR. That distinguishes whether you're a zoning expert or not. If you say FAR, you're not a zoning expert. So always say.
So what's the proper term?
FAR. If you interview a zoning consultant, if they say FAR, get a new one. I'm serious. It's a no-no. It's like mispronouncing French or something. Okay. The key number here is the factor. These are all the residential districts. Is the factor there? The FAR tells you how big you can build your building. The higher the number, the more you can build. The basic math is you take your square footage of your site. Let's say it's 10,000 square feet, and you have an FAR of 3. You can build 30,000 square feet. You have an FAR of 6. You can build 60,000 square feet. It's the easiest math of the whole. But it's it's very important. You go to this chart, you find out which. This is the residential FAR, so each one is slightly different. But this is how you work through the zoning resolution. You go to these different charts. The community facility charts are a little bit more complicated and spread out, but I will explain how they work. But the residential is in one place. The commercial, this is just for commercial use, not your residential use. FAR, you go to your commercial district, there's all sorts of types and sizes, and then you go to your number over here, and this is just, the first chart was your residential use. This is your commercial permitted use. It's the same 9, you multiply the number by the size of your lot. And then, there's another chart you go to. If you're in a commercial district, the chart tells you which residential district you have the equivalent of. So if you're in a commercial district, you go to the commercial chart, that tells you your commercial floor area. You then look at this other chart, which I don't have here, but where it tells you that your C1 means you're in an R10. So you go to the R10 chart. So now you've got your community, you've got your residential, and now you've got your commercial component. And then there's a series of charts that tell you how you work out your community facility. But the way that that's explained is to give you an example of how it works. Let's say you're in a C1A district. Your commercial, if you go to the charts, your commercial is 2. And that's for my purposes. Let's say 1 FAR means 1 floor. It just helps me make the example here. So that means you can build 2 floors of commercial. Your community facility, based on the community facility numbers are kind of spread around the zoning resolution, is 10. You could build a 10-story commercial community facility building. Not any more than you need, but then you go to the C18 is an R9 equivalent. The R9 says 7.5. So what you've got here is you've got 3 different FARs for 3 different uses. What's your maximum? You go to the bigger one, which is always the community facility number. The community facility number is always the bigger number. You got 10. You can build a 10-story building. So what's the potential development? You build 2 floors of commercial at the bottom. That's your 2.0. That's your max. You can build 7.5 floors of residential. Let's say 7. So now you built 7 floors of residential. That's 9 floors. You got a floor left over for your community facility. So a development in this district could be ground floor retail, a community facility on the 2nd floor with a double height ceiling, and then residential above. which can generate funding for your project. And that's a mixed-use development. Now, first step, the first thing you do when you have a piece of property is you prepare a zoning analysis of the real estate assets. And what does the analysis give you? It gives you your zoning districts, R1 to 10, C1 to 8. It gives you the permitted uses. Is it residential, commercial, mixed use, community facility, or all of the above? How big? What is the maximum permitted floor area? And then what's the maximum permitted building height? And you can see from those charts we went through how that works. What is the floor area per use? The different FAR for different uses. And then very important, total used floor area. So when you look at a religious piece of property, you've already used some of your floor area. So you need to know what you've used, and then second, what you've got left over. And this, anybody who owns a piece of property in the city of New York for any reason, and never mind the hundreds and hundreds of religious organizations, should analyze their property, particularly religious organizations, for the reason I told you at the beginning, they're all underdeveloped. And then you know what you've got. And then you can start using it in different ways. Okay, now we're going to I moved through that pretty quickly. I hope you understand. If any people get the basic concepts, okay, because now what I want to do is get into nuts and bolts of applications. I'm going to look at 5 different ways that that the zoning allows you to make use of not only what you have, but maybe the zoning resolution is a living, breathing document that adjusts over time and predicts future. And so they have a number of applications that if you can fit the findings, and the basic finding is that you fit into the neighborhood. That, you know, you want to, if you're in a 10 neighborhood story building neighborhood, don't ask for 20 floors. That you fit in the neighborhood in its current character, and that you are part of the anticipated growth of that neighborhood. And that's what really is, putting aside all the details of these findings and all the fine print, that's what you've got to understand. So you've got your piece of property, you know you've got development rights, look around your neighborhood. What is this neighborhood to you? What makes sense? Are there 10-story buildings? Let's think about a 10-story building. So the first is as of right, and that's the easiest, because what you've got, let's say you have a piece of property that has 50,000 square feet, and your church uses 10. You've got 40,000 square feet. Well, you can use, if you just are willing to do as of right development, that's just building permits with no public approvals. You don't have to go through any kind of hearings. You don't have to worry about any kind of input. How do you utilize that floor area to expand your facilities? And maybe let's say you might say, okay, let's make the church 20,000 square feet. Let's build a 30,000 square foot residential building above it to generate money. Or maybe let's put some retail in. It depends what area you're in. But, you know, there's the simplest transaction, and then there's a variety of ways you can do that, as we'll go through, is that you figure out what you've got as of right, and you use the as of right. Maybe you build a new church in the ground floor with a residential building above. A lot of churches are on property you can build 10-story buildings, so maybe the best option is, depending on the condition of the church and the congregation, you relocate them, build a brand new building with a brand new church on the ground floor, a new community facility designed by Jeff here on the 2nd floor, and residential above to pay for them. That's the easiest. Then I'm going to go through these point by point. The second one is where you sell your development rights. You don't need them, you sell them. Now that's a little hit or miss, because you can only sell to people who touch your property. You can't just sell it anywhere. They've got to abut your property. But if you look at hundreds of properties, you're bound to find in there a dozen or so options where your church is fine, there's a development next door, and you can approach that developer and sell your development rights that you're not going to use, because you don't have, it's win-win for both. You sell them, you don't have plan to use them, developer gets extra development rights, and you work out a price for both sides, come out ahead. And I've done lots and lots of these.
The city's created special zoning districts, though, to allow that it doesn't have to.
Yeah, there are, particularly landmarking, you know, there are special districts. Broadway theaters can sell down the road. The High Line can sell down the High Line. You know, the landmarks properties can sell, but most of the time you've got to abut somebody if you're not in one of those special districts. If you're in a special district, you're in a landmark district, there's other options, but You should assume most of the time, you should look at every single piece of property, look at your neighbor on your left, on your right, and behind you, and determine if any of those are development sites. And if you go through enough of them, you'll find a few without having to worry about a special district, but you're right.
Can I just mention bricks and mortals? You know about bricks and mortals, the advocacy group that's trying to change the zoning to free up development rights. Group has actually become much more organized. We're in the process of hiring a director to help us with moving forward. It's a number of religious institutions and some not-for-profits who are trying to give valuation to landmark churches or other churches as well, even if they aren't landmark, to utilize these rights. A couple different approaches, but it involves a city council vote, and we're having trouble finding a council person to move it forward.
Yeah, there are zoning.
They just made it this why the transfer of landmark.
Right, which is why St. Bart's and St. Patrick's and a few others have just done major deals.
Right, there's a movement. There's zoning lawyers who thought about, there should be all community facilities and all religious institutions should have more flexibility because why should they be stuck only selling to their neighbors? It's so restrictive. It's always out there. Sometimes it's successful and you get it through, the Broadway theaters and Highline, and some are still out there being worked on.
I think that there would be, I've thought about this a bit, and I think it would be helpful, certainly with landmark churches and landmark districts, to expand those districts. If you're really stuck at that point, right? One of the concerns about extending that to just like a religious property or any is there's the race to the bottom. You're talking about in a particular district, for example, the number of churches that are there that are in financial dire straits. The race to the bottom on valuation of those air rights, if it goes too far, I don't know how you define the district, and you don't want a church who's willing to take anything at this point to survive to then really reduce the value of that. The other thing is that I'm a big believer of the fact that our church buildings are one of the biggest reasons why our churches are not successful. And so now we're giving them the way out to say, oh, now we can keep our really, antiquated building and just make some money selling some air rights. I just think these are two comments that come from it. But certainly the landmark churches are just, it's a little flexible, but it's not flexible enough to go across the street.
Right, it's not far enough. You really should be able to go further. The Broadway theaters can go anywhere. Right. Depends on the clout you got. The Highline is my favorite. You can put it on the Highline and shoot it up the street. Any questions at this point? I kind of covered a lot of stuff really quickly there before we get into nuts and bolts. Just want to make sure everybody's
These are the nuts and bolts.
Well, now it's going to get even more nutty and bolty, more bolty. So there's selling your air rights. There's an application to the City Planning Commission to change the zoning, and the city is very receptive to mission-driven development projects to push through a rezoning, to support a rezoning with a mission-driven development component where you can create a new church, new community facilities, affordable housing, and market rate housing. It's very receptive to that. But it's complicated and it takes public approval. Now, then there's the Board of Standards of Appeal. The fundamental difference between city planning and the BSA is that city planning is kind of a larger concept. You usually have to zone other properties besides your own, besides the church, and it's permanent change. The BSA is designed to deal with a problem for a single piece of property. You've got a piece of property, it's got some zoning, and I'm going to give you an example here. It's got some zoning restriction. Your property has an odd shape. So to build, you've got your church, you want to build a residential building, but because you're on a straight angle that cut through, it wasn't your fault, you can't put the right yards in there and develop a large enough footprint. So you go to the BSA and say, can you waive the yard requirements so I can build up my, I don't want any more floor area. The BSA can waive anything, by the way, but I don't want more floor area. I just want to be able to build my 10-story building, and I can't put the right yards in because I'm on a weird street corner that's at an angle like this and not like this. Zoning is designed for square properties for the most part. So if you're on an irregularly shaped property, you can get relief from the BSA. So the BSA is an individual building, and it doesn't change the zoning. It waives some problem you have. And then the last one we go through is this is for landmark buildings designated or in landmark districts, where you go to the LPC and you go to city planning, and you basically kind of do what the BSA does. You ask for a bunch of waivers in order to develop a building, to develop your resources that can't be done without some waivers, and then that development is then used to fund the preservation of the landmark. So let me kind of go through. It's a very complicated application. You got to get 2 agencies to full ULURP, but you know, you got a landmark building with a need, and I'm going to go through a sample here where I think we have a need, and we're asking for some tough waivers, but I think we have a need. So transferring development rights. It's a series of, it's a private transaction. You don't need anybody's sign off, even though you're changing the zoning, you're moving development rights around. You're not actually changing the districts. You don't need any public approval. It's a purely private transaction. And one of the keys is that, because this is always asked, if you sell your development rights, what about your ownership? You retain full ownership of your building. You can sell your development rights. You have full ownership of your building. You have full ownership of what you, people always ask that question, if I become part of this development lot, that you have your taxes, not in your case, water bills, liability, violations, it's all, when you sell your development rights, your ownership rights are maintained. Without that, it wouldn't be successful, and it works, and there's hundreds and hundreds of Zelda done all the time, and I never heard a problem.
Maybe this is for Renato too. So if that's an asset that you're selling, does the church need to get the Attorney General this week?
Yes. Yes. There is that step.
It depends on the church. So there are, if you're our Methodist friends, they don't have to go to the Attorney General at all. The court order. They have to just go straight to the court order. That's the same for Presbyterians. It's the same for the Episcopal Church, and for the Reformed Church in America. The Lutherans have to go to 5 agencies. The Lutherans go to the Attorney General's office. What did we do wrong?
You think you build it in the New York State charter?
Part of that. The religious corporations law actually lays out, unlike New York, different than I think almost any state, actually lays out the rules by denomination, and then there's a catch-all for everybody. So each of the denominations has its own kind of laid out.
And with us, it's different if you're LCA background or AFC background, right?
That's within your constitution. Yeah. It's made it a little more complicated. But yeah, it really depends on what denomination you are as to what makes you approval. But for most, you know, a sale of even a single air rate would be equivalent of a property transfer.
Right, so I should have rewritten that and said other than AG, but at least from a zoning point of view. But it's important. It's important. I should keep aware of that. I shouldn't tell religious organizations there's no government approval because there is an AG process. That's a good point. So how do you do this? These are the basic steps you go through. Here they are. First, you negotiate a price. It's a negotiation. You know, you have 10,000, you have 50,000 square feet. You're using 10. You're going to sell 40. Maybe you want to keep 20 for expansion. You're going to sell 30. The person next door to you has potential for 50 as well. They're going to knock and build 80 or 90, and it's a price. It's a negotiation. The general rule is you split. If I own a piece of property and my development rights are, let's say, $400 a square foot, and I want to buy from my neighbor, since they're not going to use those development rights, they're going to sell it to me for $200. They're going to get $200 of profit for development rights that they have no intention of using. And the developer, I'm going to get these at half value. Then I can go sell them for $400. So that's why it works. So the general rule is a 50-50, but you have to negotiate. It depends on where you are in the city. There's a difference between different neighborhoods.
Is that an automatic thing for the person? So if your next door neighbor is buying that 50,000 square feet, he can just automatically put that on top of his building or a part of his building?
Well, unfortunately, Zeldas can't waive zoning. So the development, almost all zoning gives you an envelope to build in, and you can always add. You never fill it out with it. The zoning envelope of a certain district is always bigger than the floor that's permitted as of right. So that way you can always buy. You can't go higher than allowed. You can't go wider. You have to do yards, but you can always fit more development rights in. Some cases, buildings have 6 or 7 properties that they've bought from and all combined in one large zoning lot. They own lot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a row of brownstones. They buy all the development rights and put them on their building.
So like West 57th Street is the perfect example, right, with all the towers there. There's no height restriction on that site, on those sites. So they just keep on buying from the nearby, neighbors and all this high scale.
Yes, some zoning districts have a height restriction. That was those letters A and B, but many, if you don't have a letter, you don't have a height restriction, and you just keep going up until you run out of development rights.
Calvary's boundaries is
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
First Methodist at 60th and Park, about 44 million, right, so their areas of the second part, so they built building big block of the 60th Street. And the funny thing is, the church's lease Menlo Park Avenue address for $100,000 a year. So the mail is delivered to Park.
There's tremendous value to not having a letter designation, not having a height limit. Now, almost all rezonings stick a letter on there. It's called contextual zoning to avoid this. But if you have an old district with without a number on it, without a letter on it, you're subject to this sort of large pyramid that you can just fill up until you reach the heavens. Yes.
Where would you find such property? I know they're scarce.
Just
the avenues tend to.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I mean, find one property to do what? I'm sorry. Well, okay. The way if you look at your property, it's there. You know that map I showed you early on? Every designation either has a letter or doesn't. So if you want to find the property, you go to your neighborhood that you're familiar with, you get that zoning map, and you go through the properties and look for the ones that don't have a letter, that are a C6 or an R8. R8A means you have a letter. It's not the end of the world, but if you find without a letter, you know there's no height limit and you have more flexibility with a letter. So that's a very good thing. Go to find the map, your neighborhood, look around in your area and find properties that don't have a letter. Good question.
City's website has it on the city.
Everything I've got, all those maps are on the city website. Very easy to get. Yeah. So to do a Zelda, to do a transfer, you first negotiate a price. Then there's 4 documents. You prepare the Zelda. That's the document. That's the zoning law development agreement. That's the document that says, I'm going to keep my 10,000 that I'm using. I'm going to keep 10,000 reserve. I'm going to give you, developer, 30,000. So once you sign that, the developer has 80. You have 10 used, 10 in reserve if you want to use in the future. And then there's there's a sort of boilerplate about just cooperating with each other. Because now you are a single zoning lot. You do have some connection. It's never been a problem as far as I know. But you're required to cooperate with each other, not to get in each other's ways. So it's a lengthy document. The key is those first couple of paragraphs.
I've been in.
Oh, well, nothing's perfect. Like I said, there's always exceptions.
Every time you go to the building department, they want to see other parties. Whatever you want to do.
And so what the Zelda says is that you have to sign off. You can't then hold a person hostage. Well, you've got this money for development rights. If you don't sign, it's because you do when the developer goes to the building department, they have to do zoning calculations, look at both properties. They say here's properties 1 and 2. They each potentially had 50. Well, 80 is here and 20 is here, and they have to show that calculation. And the Department of Buildings have to understand it's been merged, and so they don't look at the Zelda. They just need to understand that you have They're going to look at another document, which I'll get to in a minute. So you have to do those calculations, and then it's up to the examiner, may say we want you to sign off. Yeah.
The other owners are party.
Yeah.
So, back in the morning, I stated that from time to time you will run into those clashes, all right? And what can we do legally as property owners having a vested interest in 20, whatever the numbers are, right, to make sure that the other party does what they're supposed to do, for holding them accountable.
Make sure you have a very well drafted Zelda.
Okay.
And they don't get, the city will not get involved in interpreting your Zelda.
No.
If you have an issue with your neighbor, you're going to court to interpret what your Zelda is.
Okay.
And just to be clear, and I think we can go to the next slide because I think it's sufficiently confused everybody.
Leave the phone numbers.
Is that, there's a difference between a zoning lot and a tax lot. That's very important for us in particular because you don't merge tax lots because now if you're with a for-profit, you've lost your tax exemption. You always maintain our own tax lot, and the zoning lot though now has both of them. But that's why it's important that you don't go to somebody who's, you know, you use somebody who's, you know, no one in this room is in this problem. But there's some that go to, like, the first time the lawyer is preparing a Zelda, that's the one that you're going to have an issue with when you try to go do something a few years later.
That's the key. Very well done at Zelda.
Well, very well done.
And just quickly, this document makes you single two, so this zone lot declaration means that lots 1 and 2 are now one zoning lots. It's very short. And then you have a purchase and sale agreement, which is no different than buying a house. Same kind of terms. Deposit, the closing date. It's really not that. It's not that much of a zoning document. It's more just a contract of sale. And those are the documents. Then you record everything. Very important to record. Otherwise, you can say I didn't say those development rights. Okay, so now we'll move into a more quick application that requires city approvals. It's an application and the city planning to rezone your property. As I said, the city is very receptive to rezoning properties. We have a couple of projects where we have one that's in the manufacturing district that is never going to be developed. It's a small church and a large piece of property. I'm going to show you a sample here of one of those. So this is, let's rezone this manufacturing district to residential. You build your church, you have some community facilities, we have some affordable housing, we have some market rate housing. So the city, but it's a very complicated project. But the advantages to the religious institutions are new space for the church, school, and community programs, market rate housing to fund the mission program, and the percentage of the housing set aside for affordable housing, which is part of your mission. And that's why it's a very attractive possibility for church institutions, and one that's the city is very receptive to. It's a complicated application, but let me try to give you a sample of how this works, and that's the best. Yeah. And then there'll be a diagram after this. The property is called Holy Redeemer in Brooklyn. The current zoning is M11. The FAR is 1, residential not permitted. The current church size is 4,000 square feet. The lot size is 40,000 square feet. And but under 1, the maximum development is 40,000 square feet without residence. Not a particular property that's ever going to really get developed anywhere, and it's a very large piece of property. So the proposed zoning is a split lot. R70 on the street, it's on Linden Boulevard, a wide street. And then R6B, which is smaller in the rear because there's houses behind it. So the city wants us to step down. Large in the street frontage, smaller in the rear with the other houses. The FAR on the street is 5.6. The FAR on the back is 2.2. The building height at the front is 85, and the back is 55 limits. So this is how you end up having a right kind of zoning that the city wants. There's a commercial overlay. I mentioned that earlier. That permits ground floor commercial uses. The city wants an overlay along Linden Boulevard, so you can put retail uses in there, even though it's a residential zone building. But you need people to be able to go buy food and clothes and pet stores and things like that. But the most project is 156,000 square feet, quite a difference from 40,000 square feet. The church,
It's actually about 15,000, and the community facility is 5.
Yeah, I know this is still being worked out, but I just roughly, the church is 10,000, 6,000 community service, maybe it's going to be more, but certainly more than 4,000. And then whatever's left over is residential. And in this case, it's going to all be affordable housing. That's the neighborhood. Not, usually you do rezoning, you have to do 30% affordable and 70% market rate. But here, for the purposes of this project in the neighborhood, it's going to be all affordable housing, so the city is very receptive to it.
The key to this is just that when we have our properties, is that when we do the zoning analysis, we have to look beyond the zoning analysis to see what's going on in that neighborhood and whether there's the possibility to go sit with city planning and make the case for a rezone. Because a site like this, that a manufacturing site for 40,000 square feet, you have very little demand for. You're able to, it's almost like tenfold value increase by going through this 18-month rezone process, and it's a worthwhile endeavor.
I've also heard it's pretty expensive.
It is. I mean, a ULURP application, depending on who you work with, could go anywhere probably from $500,000-$600,000 to $1 million. The difference is that a ULURP application here nets a $10 to $12 million profit. And so you have to weigh that. And just so we've done these, and I'd say there's three different kind of, depending on the desire to invest, there's three different ways to kind of cooperate with a developer that you're going to partner with. We've done it in one way where the congregation or the church says, you know, we can contribute nothing to this process, which is like the one I showed you in the Bronx before, where we still negotiate that if they're successful in the rezone, we get paid on the post-rezone square footage, but at a discount in the price per square foot. Then we have others where the congregation has said, we're willing to contribute as a joint venture partner. And in that case, we're actually saying we take almost very little discount off of it, right? Because now we're both sharing in that risk. That's what's happening in this one, right? We're sharing in the risk together, but we want to have the value at the higher square footage at the end. And then we have a church right now who has some more significant assets that are doing two rezones, and they're doing it by themselves, because at the end of the project, they want to get absolute top fair market value. So you can still negotiate with how much you want to invest.
Yeah, and those other properties, one's in an M zone, so the city's open to it. Another one's in what's called the C8, which only allows gas stations. So the city, both those sites, they're never going to be developed, they're never going to be moved forward, they're never going to become a part of the future. So in both those cases, the designation 61 is no longer relevant. The city is willing to rezone for a mission-driven development project. Yes.
What happens if in the future that area becomes extremely gentrified, and now you're buying 100% affordable housing? Stay that way, and you change it, the community objects?
Well, that's happened in a lot of places. And if you walk around, you know, generally your 100% affordable housing projects funded by HPD and HDC, the city agencies, will have anywhere, depending on the program, 40 to 60 years that it's restricted in. So it's, you know, it's what it is. And so they can object to it after it's already there. But you normally will have, and now they're trying to push it to 80 years with certain projects, depending on how much they fund. But at some point in the future, those restrictions will end. And that's where you see some of these affordable projects that are being converted into market rate.
It's llamas, you know, it changes over time, you know.
Unless it's inclusionary.
Unless there's if you're doing this, so if you do a rezone, there's a certain requirement in the building that the city is saying, okay, we're giving you this great value, right? We're letting you now build 156,000 square feet instead of 40. 30% of that new building must permanently remain affordable. It's not always 30%. It depends on what the income brackets are, but
right. And there's different income brackets. It's 40%, 60% AMI, 100%. So there's negotiations. There's room to negotiate, but it's permanent. Did you have a question?
Yeah. How do you self-oppose this with the development? So, you know, let's say you go in saying you want a 10-story building, but you know, really they think you're okay with a 50-story building. What's the sort of
that happened?
What's
For the first time in my life, I went into city planning with an R6, and they said, "How about an R8?" I couldn't believe it. What you do, it's very important. The first step is key. You sit down with your client. You sit down with an architect. You work out what you think makes the best proposal, because you've got to have. You can't go in there without a rationale, a city planning rationale. You can't go because I need more money. You've got to say, this is a rationale. This is the program we're going to provide. This is the affordable housing. This is what we're going to do, and go in with a proposal. Look at the zoning map. Like the one I looked at, it was an M1. It was next to an R6A. So I thought R6A made sense. I went in there with an R6A. We did a very careful planning. They said, well, you're on a corner. We think R8X is better because this is a corner. There's a big lot. We never went back. No. But you know, what you do is you prepare a presentation. You send it. I know the city agencies. I've worked with them all for a million years. You go in there, you bring in your team, you send them a presentation in advance that looks nice, and you sit down and they'll have a very frank discussion with you about what fits in, because they have an idea about the entire neighborhood. They give you a personal design to that particular neighborhood, that particular borough, and they have a concept that they're working on towards the future.
And certainly on the larger sites, what I've noticed on a couple of occasions, like the one in the Bronx, which is that full city block, when we went in to go speak to them, you know, they actually said, we've been waiting for you. Because they said, we drive by this all the time and we haven't seen anything, and it's a logical place for us to rezone the site and to build, like, that site in the Bronx, besides the 42,000 square foot church, is a 580,000 square foot affordable housing project. Not one, but it's a whole complex, and they want to encourage that. If you walk in these days with a fairly decent rationale from a city planning perspective, and you utter the words affordable housing at this administration, they will do what they can to push that through at city. Now, the next step, though, which is the council member, to see if they're as supportive with that as well, because that's going to be a part of the process. It's going to be the council member, and then the borough president's office.
And the community board, they all have hearings, they all get a say. You have to, the best is to get along with that, all of them as best you can. But I was going to say, you go in and say you want to rezone, you say it's affordable housing, and then we throw in mission-driven development. That's a booster check. That's what changed my program when I went in that time and got the extra floor area. And I think they looked at that site for a while. It was an M1, it was vacant, a small church, and they were waiting for somebody to show up and say, because they had a plan for that site. We want you to be a signature building on this site. It's part of our overall plan. We'll give you an R8X.
Yeah, the other thing you do very early on is you create a neighborhood. What else? Precedent of county. So,
yeah, well, we didn't go there with an R10.
Of the one Bronx, there was 20-story building on the next block.
Across the street is
Right.
what are they called? Something towers.
Yeah, something towers right across the street, 22-story.
Stevenson Towers.
Stevenson Towers, right? And I mean, on the other side, there's single-family homes, but the argument we made is really this is part of the corridor of high-rise along White Plains Road. We made that argument. Right?
Transition neighborhoods.
And White Plains Road is also a major north-south artery. Linden Boulevard is a major east-west artery. So there's a whole, rationale that you bring to the table when you go and talk.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, community service space, is that really retail space, 6,000?
No. There's retail and community facilities are two different use groups.
So when you talked about 156,000 square feet, I originally thought it was maximum of 40,000 square feet. If we expand it by compensating 150,000 square feet, 140 of that is affordable housing, 10,000 goes to the church. How much of that space on the bottom of those vendors, or those shops, those businesses that now are connected?
There's only going to be one, and this is where this whole your process is interesting.
Here's the building.
The council member, although they're not supposed to, always have an ask. And usually it's so in this case, the ask is that there isn't enough affordable medical for the people in that neighborhood. And so the ask is that we dedicate a portion of that to be rented out to a affordable medical provider. And so, so in this example here, almost the vast majority of the first floor is going to be our church facility. And then one of the corners would be allocated to, a medical facility. But that's still going to be a tenant. It may not be a high paying, but it'll be.
There probably won't be retail use, but the city plan is very much into having commercial overlays on large avenues someday down the road. So even though it's unlikely to have any retail uses because we're going to use it for this affordable, they often put it in there. It's just one of the rules under the current thinking is to always have them. So 50 years from now, it can be stores. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. We said it doesn't really think it makes sense. But if they want it, it's not a big deal to add it. Yeah.
This is about 10 minutes. Go on just quickly.
Yeah. So that's the building. That's the floors. That's the back. That's what it looks like. Now I'm going to go through a BSA. I'll go through quickly. The BSA has 5 findings. You have to have a physical hardship. In the case of churches, we have the advantage. If you have a programmatic need, that qualifies as a physical hardship. If your property's got a funny shape, if you have a privilege, and I'm going to show you a sample, if you have a programmatic need that can't be satisfied with your current setup, you can get relief. That's a huge advantage for religious institutions and schools. You have to do a financial analysis. That's not required for not-for-profits. That saves you a big step and a big expense. Then it's got to be consistent with the neighborhood. You've got to do something that fits in with the neighborhood. That's a standard finding. It can't be self-created. You can't go and chop up your property yourself to create the hardship you're complaining of. And your predecessor title. And even if your person you bought it from did that, you're stuck with what they did. And the land is a minimum necessary. If you can make it work with 5 stories, they're not going to give you 10 stories. They're going to figure out what's the might, So you have to make, these are very specific technical findings that an application has to go through. But so you don't have to do B, and you have the programmatic. So here is a sample of a waiver. The existing church has 1 floor, and it's used for a sanctuary. The floor uses about 50% of their permitted floor area ratio. So they've got unused development rights. The end users are going to use to build more floors, so they can go up. It's a full lot coverage single floor building right now. The zoning regulations require the upper floor to set back from the ground floor. Each floor is smaller than the floor below it. That means in order for them to go up, they have to go like this. That's expensive. And inconsistent floor plates. So that's what they have. So as of right, they could use their floor area, but they'd have to build this tiered building. The proposal is the church needs more space for programmatic needs, classrooms. The application seeks a waiver of the upper floor setback requirements. The waiver allows the church to build a second floor that is the same size as the ground floor. Push it out. A larger second floor is needed to accommodate classroom space, and it's less expensive than building a second and third floor. So the idea is a classroom should all be on the same floor with the classrooms, with the offices. You don't want to run them down the stairs, and it's just a lot more expensive to build retaining walls that keep going in than it is to put them all on the outside where you've already got the structural building. And then here is, okay, oops, sorry. This is the building from a view. This gray area is the existing church. Under zoning, they would have to build a second floor like this and a third floor like that. So you have to submit a plan to BSA showing what you have to do as of right. And then we would submit a second plan showing 1 floor for the entire. You end up with a smaller building. You don't ask for any more floor area. It's programmatic needs. So that is a BSA example. It's a complicated application, but it's doable. And then this is the landmark, for landmark churches and buildings. And the key here is I go through the needs. You've got to have a need, a funding need. You've got to have a problem. You can't make your building work. Your congregation isn't big enough. You don't have enough funds, and you've got all these landmark conditions you've got to satisfy. So you end up going to landmarks, and the landmarks you have to say we're going to create a preservation fund. We're going to dedicate money. You have to have specific program, the boiler, the window. You're going to create a preservation fund generated by this new development, and the money is dedicated, and that's the key to the landmarks approval. And then landmarks also have to say that whatever you're doing isn't going to interfere with the historical significance of the church. And in this case, you'll see that's not an issue. The key is you've got to preserve, you've got to have money, you've got to have a program. You've got to have a specific maintenance and capital project program. You just can't be vague about that. You'll never get anywhere with landmarks until you do. Then you go to the city planning and you ask for waivers because you say, in order for us to build a building to generate money, we need zoning waivers because our site is too restricted by the landmark church. Is that clear? And it's a complicated application, but it's very doable for landmarks. And so here's an example of what we're trying to do. Here's a landmark church. Uses up a lot of property. Has a lot of unused development rights. Can't sell them. This building's fully developed. This building's fully developed. This is Central Park. This street. There's no place to sell them. The church currently owns a small parish house, 6-story parish house, that's 19 feet wide. That's the only real estate asset they have. So what we want to do is use not even all the floor area. In the day, this project only uses half the available floor area, but is to build a taller building. To do that, though, we need waivers. The parish house is 19 feet wide. That means you can't go higher than 60 feet. You can't go higher than the width of the street. It's called a sliver wall. So you can't build higher than 60 feet. Doesn't matter who you are or what you are. So we need a sliver wall waiver. The sliver wall is not really meant for this kind of neighborhood. It's really meant for brownstone neighborhoods. It's something from spiking up to brownstones. But the sliver wall is what you have to waive. Otherwise, so the sliver wall would allow us to go straight up like that. And then as you go up, on the side of the sliver wall, you hit setback requirements of height, another height limit, because you're in an A district with a letter, so you have a height limit. And so we need a waiver of the sliver wall, a waiver of the setback, because the floor plates become too small. It's a small piece of property, and then we need a waiver of the height requirement to go up where we want to go. And the issue we have to deal with is that the 6 floors is going to be rebuilt, but it needs to be a parish house. The church needs it. So those 6 floors are not going to generate any funds, and these upper floors have to pay for the parish house and pay for the maintenance of the landmark institution.
But other than that, it's easy.
That's easy. The slaughter law is something that really gets people on the tizzy about, but we're going to go in front of landmarks and city planning. And what you do, to answer your question, Tim, you go meet with all these agencies in advance. You don't just file an application. You go meet with landmarks. You go meet with city planning. You meet with some what? Sorry. 19. It's an R10A, so still
overlooking Central Park with a landmark in front of it. So there's value there.
Because you can put windows along here to face over the church. That's how
This is not going to be an easy. I think the point is that,
well, that's why we brought in in-house zoning counsel, because now we can look at our sites and say more creatively, this isn't just what the zoning analysis allows us to do. It allows us to actually turn around and say, what possible things, because we're a landmark, what possible waivers could you achieve that might, get this building constructed?
And then the last slide, all these applications require a detailed project description prepared by zoning experts, and architectural renderings, making it look really nice is key to make it even get not locked in. And then an environmental assessment statement, which is a long, complicated document to just make sure you're not having any adverse environmental impact, not creating too much traffic or too much impact on schools. So those are the basic documents you need, just so you have that for any of those applications.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I know that was a lot, but we really wanted to kind of show you what not only how zoning works, but what options are out there for our site. One thing about, for me, the vision I see for some folks in this room, because you're denominational leaders, is that if I was the leader of a denomination and I saw where all of our denominations are right now, is to think about being much more proactive and smarter, because if it was any for-profit business that had what we had, right? When we said before that you're competing with a Disney, but we have a much better product, right? We do. But what we're not doing is utilizing them properly or being really smart and strategic about how we're handling it. Because if I had 200 pieces of property, I know that it's an investment, but I would be doing zoning analysis and studies on all of these pieces of property. And then I would at the same time be analyzing with someone within the denomination, going to these congregations and determining the viability of those congregations, who have the right leaders, where are the demographics in there, is this a place we want to be in, and then pinpoint, and while we're doing a zoning analysis and understanding a financial feasibility for a potential project, you're putting the leadership in place and determining from a mission plan perspective, do we fit in this neighborhood in the future, and how, and what would we be doing? And if we put that together, you start with 5 or 6 or 7 of these projects and start being strategic about, we're putting the right person, this is our mission plan, and this is a location that we can do a project on. It's almost like putting grids over each other, right? And then you'll see the ones that can work, and then just and do it in a smart, strategic way, and then we can start to kind of duplicate it. Just something to think about. Still waiting for the denomination who's going to make the plunge for that level of like really strategic thinking. It's a little bit harder with our Lutherans because of the fact that you don't have the same control. But by doing it by model, by saying these are the 6 that we've done, they've been successful, then being able to team up with those congregations that's where all of those things fit in properly. All right, so we're going to have some lunch for those